The morning air on Valdres Prime bit through Hayen's work jacket like frozen needles. He pulled the collar higher around his neck and checked the power level on his mining scanner one more time. The device hummed softly in his hands. It's blue. Screen showing the mineral readings he desperately needed to find. Behind him, the human colony of New Sol looked small and fragile against the massive alien landscape. The prefab buildings seemed to huddle together for warmth, their metal walls already showing rust stains from the planet's harsh weather. Smoke rose from the main generator building, where his friend Tay worked to keep their failing power systems. Running Heen was not a big man. It's barely 5 feet and 3 inches tall. He often felt like a child among the other colonists. His slight frame made him perfect for crawling through maintenance shafts and fixing broken equipment in tight spaces. But it also made him the worst choice for venturing into the dangerous wilderness beyond their settlement. Unfortunately, choice was a luxury they could not afford. The rare minerals they needed lay deep in Korathi territory. The Korathi were the apex predators of Valdres Prime, massive wolf-like creatures that ruled the forests and mountains with intelligence and brutal efficiency. Every colonist knew the stories. Every colonist knew to stay away, but their mining equipment was breaking down faster than they could repair it. Without fresh supplies of trilithium, or the colony's shields would fail within a month. Without shields, the next storm season would kill them all. Heen adjusted his backpack and started walking toward the tree line. His boots crunched through the frost-covered grass that marked the edge of safe territory. Each step took him further from human protection and closer to a realm where he did not belong. The forest was ancient and alien. Trees stretched impossibly high into the purple sky, their bark black as night and covered in glowing blue veins that pulsed like heartbeats. Strange bird-like creatures called from the canopy above, their voices echoing strangely in the thick air. Everything felt wrong to human senses, as if the very atoms here followed different rules. Heen had been walking for 2 hours when he found the first territorial marker. It was a tree, larger than the others, with deep claw marks carved into its trunk. The marks were fresh and intentional, forming patterns that spoke of intelligence and purpose. This was not random animal behavior. This was a message, a warning, a claim of ownership written in a language of violence. He was now in Korathi lands. His scanner beeped softly. Detecting the mineral signatures, he sought somewhere deeper in the forest. Jan took a deep breath and kept walking. Every step felt like walking toward his own grave. But the colony needed those minerals more than he needed safety. The attack came without warning. One moment he was alone among the alien trees. The next, shadows moved between the trunks with predatory grace. Hoyan froze as massive shapes emerged from the undergrowth. Moving with the fluid coordination of a hunting pack, the Korathi were even more terrifying in person than in the colony's survival videos. They stood nearly 10 feet tall on powerful hind legs, their bodies covered in thick fur that shifted color to match their surroundings. Their heads were wolf-like, but larger, with intelligent yellow eyes and mouths full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. Powerful claws extended from their hands, each one longer than Hyen's fingers, but it was their eyes that truly frightened him. These were not simple beasts. Intelligence looking back at him was sharp, calculating, and completely alien. The largest of the creatures stepped forward. Even among his massive packmates, this one commanded attention. Battle scars crisscrossed his dark fur, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "What is this?" the Alpha said in heavily accented but understandable human speech. "A tiny Earthborn walks in our hunting grounds. How amusing." The other Korathi began to laugh. The sound was nothing like human laughter. It came from deep in their chests, a rumbling noise that made the ground vibrate under Hyen's feet. Several of the younger ones began circling him, sniffing the air and making comments in their own growling language. "Look how small it is," said one, a sleek female with silver markings. "I've seen human pups larger than this one." "Perhaps it is lost," suggested another, his tone mocking. "Should we help the little squeaker find its way home?" Ah! More laughter. Hoon stood perfectly still in the center of their circle, knowing that any sudden movement might trigger their hunting instincts. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to breathe slowly and evenly. The alpha stepped closer, lowering his massive head to examine Han more closely. His breath was hot against Hyan's face, carrying the scent of meat in wild places. "You are brave, little squeaker," the alpha said thoughtfully, "or perhaps simply stupid. Few Earthborns dare enter our territory. Fewer still survive the experience." "Need minerals," Han said quietly, surprised that his voice came out steady. "My people will die without them." This caused another round of laughter from the pack. The alpha tilted his head, studying Han like a curious but dangerous cat. "Your people's weakness is not our concern," he said, "but you interest me, Tiny. 1. You show no fear, though you should. You speak truth, though lies might serve you better. This amuses me." The alpha straightened to his full height, making Han feel even smaller by comparison. "I am Vorthok, alpha hunter of the northern pack. You may pass through our lands today, little squeaker. Consider this a gift of curiosity. But know this," his voice dropped to a threatening growl, "my generosity has limits. Do not mistake tolerance for acceptance." The pack began to disperse, melting back into the forest shadows as quickly as they had appeared. But several of the younger Karathi remained visible, following Han at a distance as he continued. Deeper into their territory, their laughter echoed through the trees long after they disappeared from sight. Han walked on trembling legs, knowing he had just survived an encounter that should have killed him. Karathi had let him live, but only barely. Their mockery rang in his ears as he searched for the minerals his colony desperately needed. He was the little squeaker now, joke among predators, surviving only because his weakness amused them. But he was alive, and his mission was not over yet. 3 weeks had passed since Hyan's first encounter with the Karathi pack. The minerals he brought back kept new soul shields running, but barely. The colony needed more, which meant more trips into Karathi territory. Each journey became a test of endurance that went far beyond simple mining. The pack seemed to find endless entertainment in the small human who dared walk their lands. They would appear without warning, surrounding him with their massive forms and alien laughter. The younger Karathi took particular pleasure in these encounters. Vix was the worst of them. The young warrior stood nearly 11 feet tall, his dark fur marked with red stripes that showed his aggressive nature. He would leap from the trees directly in front of Hyan, causing the human to stumble backward in surprise. Then Vex would laugh that rumbling laugh and call his friends to watch the show. "Look how the little squeaker jumps," Dex would say in his broken human speech.
"Ow."
Like a frightened rabbit when the shadow falls. Vrex was more subtle but equally cruel. The scout would follow Han through the forest, stepping on branches to make them crack or howling suddenly from nearby bushes. He seemed to enjoy watching Han spin around in confusion, searching for threats that melted away like smoke. "The Earthborn has no nose," Vrex would tell the others, "no ears, no eyes. How does such a weak thing survive in any world?" But Hian endured their games because he had no choice. Each successful mining trip brought back enough trilithium to keep the colony alive for another week. Each time he returned safely, his fellow colonists looked at him with growing respect and amazement. More importantly, Hian began to learn. He started studying the Karathi language during his off hours, using the colony's basic translation programs to decode their speech patterns. The language was complex, built on growls and subtle changes in tone that human throats could barely produce. But Hian was patient, and slowly the alien words began to make sense. He learned that Dex's name meant swift strike in their tongue. Vrex translated to silent shadow. Even their casual insults carried layers of meaning that spoke to a sophisticated culture built around hunting and hierarchy. On his 5th trip, Hyun tried something different. Instead of simply enduring their mockery, he began leaving small gifts at their territorial markers. A solar battery here, a communication device there. Nothing valuable enough to upset the colony's supply situation, but items that might interest creatures who had never seen human technology. The first few gifts disappeared without comment. But on his 7th trip, Heian found Vrex examining one of the communication devices with obvious curiosity. The scout looked up when Heian approached, his yellow eyes showing something other than amusement for the first time. "What is the purpose of this thing, little squeaker?" Vrex asked, holding up the device. "It lets you talk to others far away," Heian explained carefully. "Press the blue button and speak. Someone else with a matching device will hear your words." Vrex tilted his massive head, processing this information. Then he pressed the button and spoke a few words in Korathi.
Oh.
A moment later, Dex's voice came. Crackling through the speaker from somewhere else in the forest, the scout's ears perked up with interest.
Oh.
This was clearly technology beyond their current understanding, and Heian could see the wheels turning in Vrex's intelligent mind. "Clever," Vrex admitted grudgingly. Perhaps Earthborns are not completely useless. It was the first compliment any Korathi had given him. The breakthrough came during Han's 9th expedition. 2 months after his first encounter with the pack, he was deep in Korathi territory, following his scanner toward a rich trilithium deposit. When he heard the sounds of distress, high-pitched whines and calls for help, but not in the adult Korathi tongue. These were the voices of cubs. Heian followed the sounds through a dense grove of the glowing trees, till he reached a rocky clearing. There, backed against a cliff face, 2 young Korathi huddled in terror, were barely half the size of adults. Their fur still soft and unmarked by battle scars. Between them and escape stood something that made even the mighty Korathi seem small. The cliff bear was a mountain of muscle and rage. Standing 15 feet tall on its hind legs, its thick hide was scarred from countless battles, and its small eyes burned with predatory hunger. Massive claws scraped against the rock as it advanced on the trapped cubs. The young Korathi were calling desperately for their parents. But no adult voices answered. They were alone, helpless, and about to die. Heian's first instinct was to run. He was no warrior. His slight frame and human reflexes were no match for a creature that could tear him apart without effort. Every rational thought told him to flee. While the beast was distracted, instead, he reached for his mining charges. The explosive devices were designed to break apart rock formations, not fight massive predators. But they were all he had, and the cub's terrified cries tore at something deep in his chest. Heian crept around the edge of the clearing, trying to position himself between the cliff bear and its intended victims. His hand shook as he armed the first charge, setting it for a 5-second delay. "Hey!" he shouted, throwing the device at the bear's feet. "Over here, you monster!" The cliff bear turned toward this new threat, confused by the sudden appearance. Of a tiny human, it had just enough time to register Heian's presence before the mining charge exploded. The blast knocked the massive creature sideways, but did not seriously injure it. Instead, it made the bear angry. Very angry, with a roar that shook dust from the cliff walls. The beast abandoned its pursuit of the cubs and charged straight at Heian. Heian ran like he had never run before. His human legs carried him through the undergrowth while behind him the cliff bear crashed through trees like they were grass. He could feel its hot breath on his back, could hear its claws tearing up the ground inches behind his feet. A second mining charge bought him a few precious seconds. A third slowed the beast just enough for Han to reach a narrow gap between two boulders. The cliff bear was too large to follow him through, but it could reach him with its massive claws. Heian pressed himself against the far wall of his rocky shelter and armed his last charge. If this didn't work, the cubs would still die. So would he. The explosion came just as the bear's claws reached for him. Rock fell like rain, and then everything went dark. When Heian woke up, he was lying on soft furs in an unfamiliar place. His head pounded, and his left arm was wrapped in bandages that smelled of healing herbs. Gentle hands were tending to his wounds. He opened his eyes to find a female Korathi watching over him. Her fur was lighter than the others he had met, marked with silver patterns that spoke of age and wisdom. Her yellow eyes held concern rather than mockery. "The little squeaker wakes," she said softly. "I am Shora, mother to the cubs you saved." Subin and Tejo live because of your courage. Heian tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through his skull. The cliff bear? He asked weakly. Dead Shora replied. Your final explosive brought down half the cliff face. The beast was crushed beneath the stones. She paused, studying his face carefully. You nearly died as well. Why did you risk yourself for cubs who are not your own? It was a good question. Hyun wasn't sure he had a good answer. They needed help, he said finally. I was the only one there. Shora's expression was unreadable, but something shifted in her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight it hadn't held before. The pack will remember this, little squeaker. What you did today changes things. The change was immediate and undeniable. When Heian returned to Karathi territory for his next mining expedition, the pack's behavior was completely different. Where before they had surrounded him with mocking laughter, now they watched him with something that looked almost like respect. Decks no longer leaped from trees to startle him. Instead, the young warrior nodded when their paths crossed, a gesture that seemed awkward coming from such a massive creature. Vrex still followed Heian through the forest, but now it felt protective rather than threatening. The other Karathi had stopped calling him Little Squeaker. The new name they used translated roughly to Little Brother in their complex language. It was not the name of an equal, but it was no longer the name of a joke. Shora was the reason for this change. The mother of the cubs Heian had saved carried significant influence within the pack, and her word carried weight with even the most skeptical warriors. When younger Karathi questioned Heian's presence in their territory, she would speak for him. The small Earthborn bleeds for our young, she would say in her measured tone. His courage is proven. Let him walk our paths in peace. But the most significant change came from Alpha Vorthok. Himself, the massive pack leader, began observing Heian more carefully during his mining trips. Where before the Alpha had treated him as an amusing curiosity, now Vorthok studied the human like he was trying to solve a difficult puzzle. On Heian's 13th expedition, Vorthok approached him directly while he worked at a trilithium deposit. You are different from other Earthborns I have encountered, the Alpha said without preamble. Most of your kind fear us. They hide behind their metal walls and weapons, but you walk among us with tools instead of guns. Hyun looked up from his scanner, meeting those intelligent yellow eyes. Fear doesn't help me do my job, he said simply. And guns won't save my colony if I can't find the minerals we need. Vorthok tilted his massive head. You speak of your colony often. Tell me of these people you serve. For the next hour, while his equipment processed the ore samples, Hyun found himself describing life in New Seoul. He talked about Tae working desperately to keep their power systems running, about the families who had traveled across the galaxy to build new lives, about children who had never seen Earth but called this harsh world home. Vorthok listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Heian finished, the Alpha was quiet for a long moment. Vorthok said finally, Yet you risk much to protect them. This is admirable. It was the first time any Karathi had called his actions admirable. The growing acceptance allowed Heian to spend more time in Karathi territory. Sometimes, when his mining work was finished early, he would linger near their gathering places. The pack began tolerating his presence around their evening fires. Where they shared stories and planned hunts, Heian learned that Karathi society was far more complex than he had imagined. They were not simply brutal predators, but creatures with rich traditions, complex relationships, and a sophisticated understanding of their world. They told stories of ancient hunts, remembered the names of legendary warriors, and honored their dead with rituals that spanned generations. In return, Hyun shared stories of Earth. He described oceans that stretched beyond the horizon, cities of glass and metal that touched the clouds, and forests where humans could walk without fear of giant predators. The Karathi listened with fascination to tales of a world where the apex predators were small and the prey. Animals outnumbered their hunters. Your Earth sounds peaceful, observed Shora during one of these evening sessions. But perhaps too peaceful. How do your people stay strong without challenge? We find other ways to test ourselves, Hyun replied. We build machines that fly between stars. We cure diseases that once killed millions. We create art and music and stories that help us understand who we are. The Karathi found this concept fascinating. In their world, strength was measured by hunting prowess and physical courage. The idea that intelligence and creativity could be forms of strength was revolutionary, but not all. Karathi accepted these new ideas. Krex represented the old ways of thinking. The ambitious warrior was nearly as large as Vorthak himself, his dark fur unmarked by silver, his yellow eyes burning with barely contained aggression. He had been absent during the Cliff Bear incident, leading a hunting party in the Southern Territories, and he returned to find everything changed. This is madness, Krex declared during a pack gathering that Hyan was allowed to witness. We are Karathi. We are hunters. We are the strongest predators on this world. Why do we now share our fires with prey? The Earthborn saved cubs of our pack, Shora replied firmly. He bled for them. By our oldest laws, this makes him worthy of respect. One act of desperate courage does not make him our equal. Krex snarled. He is still small, still weak, still alien. His presence dishonors our traditions. Vorthok had remained silent during this exchange, but now the Alpha spoke. Krex raises concerns that deserve consideration, he said carefully. Our ways have kept us strong for countless generations. Change must be approached with wisdom. Hyun felt the tension in the gathering like a physical weight. Some Karathi nodded agreement with Krex's words, while others looked toward Shora for guidance. The pack was divided, and Hyun realized his presence had become a source of conflict. The debate might have continued all night, but it was interrupted by urgent howls from the forest. A messenger arrived, a young scout whose fur was matted with sweat and fear. Alpha, the scout gasped. The Black Maws approach from the eastern valleys. Their war leader Gorthak brings 50 warriors. They mean to claim our territory. The gathering erupted into snarls and battle cries. The Black Maws were an ancient rival pack, larger and more aggressive than Vorthak's northern pack. They had been growing bolder in recent seasons, pushing into disputed territories and challenging traditional boundaries. How long until they reach our borders? Vorthok demanded. 2 days, perhaps 3 if the storms slow them, the scout replied. Alpha rose to his full imposing height. Then we prepare for war. Every warrior must be ready. Every hunter must choose their ground. As the Karathi began planning their defense, Krex pointed a massive claw at Hyan. What of the Earthborn? He demanded. Will we risk Karathi lives to protect alien weakness? Before Vorthok could respond, Hyan stood up. His small human frame looked absurdly fragile among the massive predators, but his voice was steady. I don't need protection, he said. I can help. Krex laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Help. What could a tiny Earthborn do against Black Maw? Warriors. Hane met the warrior's contemptuous gaze without flinching. I know things you don't. I have tools you've never seen. If you're willing to trust me, I might be able to give you an advantage. The challenge hung in the air between them. Around the fire, Karathi warriors watched to see how their leaders would respond. Vorthok studied Hyan for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Speak, little brother. What do you propose? As Hyan began explaining his ideas for defensive preparations, he caught Shora's eye across the fire. The female Karathi nodded approvingly, and for the first time since arriving on Valdra's Prime, Yong felt like he truly belonged somewhere. The Black Maws were coming. The northern pack would need every advantage they could get. But they would face this challenge together. Predator and prey united by bonds stronger than species. The war for territory was about to begin, and the little Earthborn would prove his worth in ways no one could imagine. The Black Maw threat never came. 3 days after the urgent warning, scouts reported that the rival pack had turned south, following migrating herds toward easier hunting grounds. The crisis passed without a single battle, but Hyan's offer to help had been noted by every Karathi warrior present. More importantly, his ideas for defensive preparations had impressed even Krex. The warrior still questioned Hyan's place among them, but he could not deny the cleverness of the human's suggestions. The Earthborn thinks like prey, Krex had admitted grudgingly. But perhaps prey knows things about hiding and surviving that hunters do not. With the immediate danger gone, the pack's attention turned to their most sacred tradition, the Great Hunt. The annual ritual was older than Karathi memory, dating back to the first packs that had claimed dominion over Valdris Prime. Every adult warrior participated. Traveling deep into the Forbidden Mountains to hunt the legendary shadow elk, these were not ordinary prey. Shadow elk stood 20 feet tall at the shoulder, their bodies crackling with energy that allowed them to phase between dimensions. They could disappear mid-charge and reappear behind their hunters, or step sideways into spaces that shouldn't exist. Hunting them required not just courage and skill, but an understanding of mysteries that touched the very fabric of reality. No, Karathi could claim true warrior status without participating in a great hunt. It was the ultimate test, the final proof of worthiness. Haon learned about the tradition during one of his evening visits to their fires. As Vorthok described the ancient ritual, the human found himself fascinated by the challenge it represented. The shadow elk choose their hunters. As much as we choose them, the Alpha explained. They test not just our strength, but our wisdom, our courage, and our understanding of the natural order. Many warriors return empty-handed. Some do not return at all. But those who succeed, added Shora, earn honor that lasts beyond death. Their names are remembered in our songs for generations. Haon listened to these stories with growing interest. The Great Hunt represented everything the Karathi valued: bravery, respect for worthy opponents, and the willingness to risk everything for glory, without fully understanding why. He found himself asking the question that would change everything. Could I participate? The reaction was immediate and explosive. Young warriors like Thex gasped in shock. Vrex's ears flattened against his skull in disbelief. Even Shora looked stunned by the audacity of the request. Krex was the first to find his voice, and his response was exactly what everyone expected. Absolutely not, the warrior snarled. The Great Hunt is sacred to our people. It has been conducted the same way for 1,000 seasons. No alien has ever participated. No alien ever will. The Earthborn has courage, Vorthok said thoughtfully. But Krex speaks truth. Our traditions exist for reasons deeper than memory. To change them lightly would dishonor our ancestors. But Haon was not deterred. The seed of an idea had been planted, and now it began to grow. I understand your concerns, he said carefully. But your traditions also speak of proving worthiness through trial. If I could pass the same tests your warriors face, would that not demonstrate my right to participate? The debate that followed lasted 3 days. Karathi from across the territory gathered to discuss this unprecedented request. Some argued that the very idea was blasphemous. Others pointed to Haon's proven courage in saving the cubs and his willingness to defend their pack. Finally, Vorthok called for silence. The Earthborn will be given a chance to prove himself worthy, the Alpha declared. But the test will be harder than any Karathi faces. He must survive alone in the deep woods for 3 days and nights, with only basic supplies and his own skill to sustain him. If he succeeds, he may join the Great Hunt. If he fails, the Alpha did not need to finish. Everyone understood that. Failure in the deep woods meant death. Krex's protests were immediate and furious, but they carried less weight now. The pack had made its decision through their leader's voice. If Huon could survive the trial, he would earn his place among the hunters. The deep woods lay at the heart of Karathi territory, where the oldest trees grew and the most dangerous predators roamed. It was a place where even experienced warriors traveled in groups, where darkness held creatures that existed at the edges of nightmares. Huon was given basic survival gear: a knife, a water container, emergency rations for 1 day, and a simple shelter. Everything else he would have to find or create himself. As he prepared to enter the testing ground, Shora approached him privately. You do not have to do this, little brother, she said quietly. No one would think less of you for withdrawing the request. Yes, they would, Huon replied honestly. And more importantly, I would think less of myself. The female Karathi studied his face for a long moment, then nodded with something that might have been pride. "Then may the hunt spirits guide your steps," she said formally, "and may you return to us with honor intact." The first day in the deep woods nearly killed him. The creatures here were unlike anything Hayne had encountered before. Shadow cats stalked him through the undergrowth, their bodies flickering in and out of visibility. Thorn vipers dropped from branches overhead, their venomous fangs seeking his exposed skin. Most terrifying of all were the whisper wraiths, ghostly beings that fed on fear and tried to lead him deeper into places where daylight never reached. But Hune had advantages that pure Karathi warriors lacked. His engineering background helped him create traps and early warning systems from forest materials. His small size allowed him to hide in places where larger predators could not follow. Most importantly, his human perspective let him think about problems in ways that traditional Karathi training did not encourage. On the second day, he made a discovery that changed everything. Following a stream deeper into the woods, Heian found evidence of an old human campsite. The equipment was weathered and partially buried, but clearly of Earth origin. Someone else had been in these woods, and recently enough that their technology still functioned, buried under a pile of leaves. He found a datapad that activated at his touch. The device belonged to someone named Jiwoo, a xenobiologist who had been studying the native wildlife of Valdris Prime. The final entry in her journal was only 3 weeks old. Day 847 finally found evidence of the parasitic infection affecting the shadow elk population. The creatures are not naturally aggressive or dangerous. Something is driving them mad, forcing them to attack anything that approaches. I believe I've developed a treatment, but I need to get closer to a specimen to test it. The Karathi won't understand. To them, the elk are simply powerful enemies to be hunted and killed. But what if hunting isn't the answer? What if healing is? The entry ended abruptly, but it explained so much. Giwu was right. Then the Great Hunt was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. The shadow elk weren't testing warriors through combat. They were suffering creatures lashing out in pain and confusion. Hune spent his third day in the deep woods following Jiwoo's trail. He found her final camp just as darkness fell, and with it, he found the missing scientist herself. Jiwoo was alive, but barely. Exposure and infection had left her weak and delirious. She had been surviving on forest plants and rainwater for weeks, too sick to make the journey back to human civilization. "The elk," she whispered when Hoyan found her. "They're not monsters. They're victims. The parasites are killing them slowly, driving them insane. I can fix this. I can heal them." As Hune helped Hugh recover enough to travel, she explained her research in detail. The shadow elk were infected with microscopic organisms that attacked their nervous systems. The dimensional phasing ability that made them such feared opponents was actually a symptom of their illness, a desperate attempt to escape pain that followed them across realities. The cure existed. Jiwoo had synthesized it from local plants, but she needed help to administer it. The treatment required getting close to an infected elk, which was nearly impossible given their current state of madness. "The Great Hunt starts tomorrow," Han told her, as they prepared to leave the deep woods together. 20 Karathi warriors will be tracking the largest shadow elk in the mountains. If your theory is correct, they're walking into a trap. Wu looked at him with exhausted but determined eyes. "Then we have to stop them," she said. "Not just for the elk's sake, but for the Karathi too. True strength isn't about killing the strongest opponent. Sometimes it's about saving them." As they emerged from the deep woods together, Hune realized that everything was about to change. The Great Hunt would begin at dawn, but this year it would be different. This year, they would hunt for healing instead of death, and if they succeeded, it would transform not just one tradition, but the very meaning of strength itself. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Forbidden Mountains as 20 Karathi warriors gathered for the Great Hunt. Their fur gleamed with ritual oils. Their claws were sharpened to razor points, and their eyes burned with ancestral purpose. Hyan stood among them, still barely half their height, but no longer treated as an outsider. His survival in the deep woods had earned him grudging acceptance from even the most traditional warriors. Only Krex continued to view his presence with open hostility. "The Earthborn brings weakness to our sacred hunt. Krex muttered to his followers. Mark my words, his alien ways will dishonor this ancient ritual. But Vorthok had made his decision. The Alpha stood before the assembled hunters, his massive frame commanding absolute attention. Today we hunt the Great Shadow, he announced. In the ritual words spoken for generations, the elk that walks between worlds awaits us in the high passes. Some of you will prove yourselves worthy. Others will learn the price of presumption. All will remember this day until their dying breath. The shadow elk they tracked was legendary. Even among its kind, local Korathi called it World Walker, for its ability to phase so completely out of reality that it seemed to disappear entirely. It stood 25 feet tall, its antlers crackling with dimensional energy, and it had killed more hunters than any elk in living memory. Jiwoo traveled with them, disguised as Hyen's equipment bearer. Her research notes and synthesized cure were hidden among his mining supplies. The Korathi accepted her presence without question, assuming she was simply another human servant, but Heian could see the fear in her eyes as they climbed higher into the mountains. Everything depended on her theory being correct. If the shadow elk was truly just a suffering creature, driven mad by parasites, then her cure might save it. If she was wrong, they would all die facing a monster beyond imagination. The trail led through narrow passes where the wind howled like tortured spirits. Ancient Korathi waymarkers guided them toward hunting grounds that had been used for countless generations. With each step, the air grew thinner and stranger, as if reality itself became less stable at these heights. They found the elk's tracks. Just after midday, the prints were enormous, each one larger than Heian's entire body. But more disturbing were the places where the tracks simply vanished, only to reappear 50 feet away in a completely different direction. The creature was phasing randomly, its dimensional abilities clearly out of control. Moves without pattern, observed Rex, studying the trail with professional interest. This will make the hunt more dangerous than usual. Good, snarled Krex. Danger separates true warriors from pretenders. But Heian was beginning to see signs that supported Ji-Woo's theory. The elk's movements weren't strategic or purposeful. They were erratic, desperate, the actions of a creature in constant pain. They caught their first glimpse of the shadow elk near sunset. It stood on a ridge above them, silhouetted against the dying light. Even at a distance, its suffering was obvious. The great creature swayed on its feet, its head shaking as if trying to dislodge some invisible torment. Its dimensional phasing flickered randomly, causing parts of its body to become transparent while others remained solid. By the hunting spirits, whispered Dex. It looks sick, looks dangerous, Krex corrected harshly. Wounded animals are the most vicious. You should attack while it's weakened. But before anyone could move, the elk noticed them. Its head snapped up, eyes focusing on the hunting party with unmistakable malevolence. Then it charged. What followed was unlike any hunt in Korathi history. The elk phased in and out of reality as it attacked, appearing suddenly among the scattered warriors before vanishing again. Its massive hooves materialized inches from Korathi hunters, forcing them to dive for cover. Several warriors fell through dimensional rifts that opened and closed without warning. Traditional hunting tactics were useless. The creature couldn't be cornered because it could step sideways into other dimensions. It couldn't be surrounded because it appeared and disappeared at random. Worst of all, its pain-driven rage made it far more aggressive than any elk the Korathi had ever faced. Vix was the first to be seriously injured. The young warrior materialized inside a dimensional fold, his left arm twisted at an impossible angle. Rex managed to drag him to safety, but others were less fortunate. We need to retreat, Vorthok shouted over the chaos. This hunt is cursed. Retreating was impossible. The elk's random phasing had created unstable dimensional barriers around them. They were trapped on the mountainside with a creature that defied every law of physics they understood. That's when Hyen made his desperate proposal. Listen to me, he called out during a brief lull in the attack. The elk isn't evil. It's sick. Can heal it instead of killing it. Krex's response was immediate and furious. Madness. This creature is our test, our challenge. To show it mercy would violate everything our ancestors believed. Your ancestors never faced parasites that drive their prey insane, Giwu shouted, back, abandoning her disguise. I'm a scientist. I've studied this condition. The elk is suffering from an infection that can be cured. Another warrior, the veteran hunter Gorak, fell victim to a phasing attack that left him partially merged with solid rock. His screams echoed across the mountains as the other hunters tried desperately to free him. Enough, Vorthok commanded. If the Earthborns have a solution, speak it quickly. We're losing warriors to this madness. Heian pulled out the synthesized cure Jiwu had created. The device looked simple, almost primitive compared to Korathi weapons. But it represented hope where everything else had failed. Someone needs to. Get close enough to inject this into the elk, he explained. The cure will neutralize the parasites and restore its natural behavior. Suicide, Krex declared. No one can get that close to the beast and survive. I can, Hyun said quietly. The words fell into sudden silence. Even the elk seemed to pause in its dimensional wandering, as if sensing the importance of this moment. Our brave little brother, Vorthok said gently, but this is beyond courage. This is certain death. Hyun looked around at the scattered, wounded warriors. These creatures had accepted him, protected him, treated him as family despite every difference. Between their species, now they were dying because of traditions that no longer served their survival. Maybe, he admitted. But if I'm right, we save not just the elk but every future hunt. If I'm wrong, I die trying to help my pack. Either way, it's better than watching. You all fall one by one. Before anyone could stop him, Hyun began running toward the elk. The creature noticed his approach immediately. Its eyes locked onto the tiny human racing across the rocky ground, and it phased directly into his path. Massive hooves thundered against stone as it charged. At the last possible moment, Hyun dove sideways. The elk's momentum carried it past him, but as it began to turn for another attack, Hyun leaped onto its partially phased leg. The sensation was indescribable. Part of his body existed in normal space, while part flickered through dimensions he couldn't comprehend. Pain shot through every nerve as reality twisted around him. But he held onto the cure device with desperate determination. The elk bucked and thrashed, trying to dislodge its tiny passenger. Hyun felt his grip slipping as dimensional forces tried to tear him apart. With his last conscious thought, he activated the cure and pressed it against the elk's neck. The injection was automatic, designed to penetrate, hide, and deliver its contents directly into the bloodstream. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything changed. The elk's violent movements slowed, its random phasing stabilized. The mad rage in its eyes faded, replaced by confusion and then relief. The great creature settled onto the ground with a sound like distant thunder, its breathing deep and peaceful for the first time in months. Hyun tumbled from its neck, unconscious and bleeding from dimensional wounds that defied medical understanding. But he was alive, and more importantly, so was the elk. The shadow elk that had terrorized hunters for generations looked around at the assembled Korathi with calm, intelligent eyes. It made a sound that was almost like gratitude, then began to fade as it phased voluntarily into another dimension, before it disappeared completely. The elk approached Hyen's unconscious form. With infinite gentleness, it touched the small human with its massive muzzle, acknowledging the gift of healing it had received. Then it was gone, stepping peacefully into dimensions beyond Korathi understanding. The silence that followed was broken by Vorthok's amazed whisper. In all our histories, no elk has ever shown gratitude to its hunters. What we witnessed here changes everything. Krex stood among the other warriors, his expression unreadable. The traditional hunt he had championed had become something entirely different, something that challenged every assumption their culture was built upon. But as he looked at Hyen's small form and the peaceful way the elk had departed, even Krex began to understand that some changes were not betrayals of tradition, but evolution of it. The great hunt was over, but its real impact was just beginning. The journey back to Pack territory took 5 days. Heian drifted in and out of consciousness for most of the trip. his body struggling to recover from exposure to dimensional forces that human physiology was never meant to endure. When he was awake, he found himself surrounded by Karathi, warriors who treated him with a reverence that felt strange and uncomfortable. Jiwoo worked tirelessly to keep him stable. Using her medical knowledge and supplies borrowed from the pack's healers, the Karathi accepted her expertise without question now, having seen the results of her research firsthand. The dimensional scarring should fade in time, she told Vorthok during one of their rest stops. But he'll carry marks from this experience. For the rest of his life, the Alpha nodded gravely. As do all who prove themselves in the Great Hunt, some scars are badges of honor. But the real conversation was happening around campfires, where the hunting party tried to process what they had witnessed. The successful healing of the Shadow Elk challenged everything they thought they knew about strength, courage, and the nature of their most sacred traditions. For 1,000 seasons we have hunted the elk, said Gorak, his own wounds from the dimensional phasing still visible. We believed this proved our worth as warriors. But what if we were wrong? What if true strength lies in showing mercy too? Those who suffer? Dex, his arm still healing from the elk's attack, spoke thoughtfully. The little Earthborn showed more courage than any of us. He faced certain death to save a creature that had tried to kill him. Is this not the highest form of warrior spirit? But Krex remained unconvinced. The traditional warrior had grown quieter during the journey home, his usual aggressive certainty replaced by troubled contemplation. Courage, yes, he admitted reluctantly. But what happens to our ways if every hunt becomes an act of healing? What happens to the strength that has protected our pack for generations? It was Rex who provided the answer that surprised everyone. Perhaps our strength grows stronger, the scout said quietly.
Ow.
The Earthborn did not abandon violence when it was needed. He used explosive force to save the cubs from the cliff bear. But he also showed wisdom in knowing when violence was not the answer. Is this not better than knowing only one response to every challenge? The debate continued around their fires each night, but the tone had changed. Where once there had been absolute certainty about their traditions, now there were questions. Where once there had been rigid adherence to ancient ways, now there was flexibility. They reached pack territory on the 6th day to find the entire northern pack waiting for them. Word of the unusual hunt had traveled ahead through scout networks and hunting calls. Karathi from across their territory had gathered to hear what had happened in the Forbidden Mountains. Shora was the first to approach when she saw Hyen's condition. The maternal instincts that had led her to protect him after he saved her cubs now flared with protective concern. What have you done to him? She demanded of Vorthok, examining Hyen's dimensional scars with worried eyes. He has done it to himself, the Alpha replied solemnly. And in doing so, he has accomplished something no Karathi in our history has achieved. As the hunting party shared their story with the assembled pack, reactions varied wildly. Some warriors were inspired by Hyen's courage and the new possibilities his approach suggested. Others were disturbed by what they saw as a dangerous departure from proven ways. The debate that followed lasted 3 days and drew Karathi from neighboring territories. It was the largest pack gathering in living memory, and the question at its heart touched the very soul of their civilization. Elder Karathi spoke of traditions that stretched back to the dawn of their species. Young warriors argued for evolution and growth. Mothers worried about the safety of changes that might weaken their defenses. Hunters wondered if mercy could coexist with the harsh realities of survival. Through it all, Hyun remained mostly silent. His body was still healing, but more importantly, he understood that this decision belonged to the Karathi themselves, had offered them a new perspective. But they had to choose whether to embrace it. On the 4th day, Vorthok called for the final decision. The voting process was ancient and formal. Each adult Karathi placed a stone in one of 2 piles. White stones for accepting the new understanding of strength. Black stones for maintaining traditional ways unchanged. The counting took hours as stones were verified and tallied by Elder warriors whose neutrality was beyond question. Hyen watched from his place beside the fire, aware that his entire future depended on the outcome. When the final count was announced, the new way had won by exactly 3 stones. It was the narrowest possible margin, but it was enough. Vorthok stood before the assembled pack, his expression grave with the weight of history. "The pack has spoken," he announced formally. "We will embrace this broader understanding of strength. Courage will still be honored, but wisdom and mercy will stand beside it as equals. The great hunt will continue, but its purpose will evolve. As we have evolved, the response was mixed. Cheers from supporters mingled with grumbles from traditionalists. Some warriors nodded approval while others walked away in disgust. The pack had made its choice. But unity would take time to rebuild. Then Vorthok did something unprecedented. The Alpha walked to where Heian sat recovering by the fire. In full view of the entire assembly, the massive Karathi leader knelt down to bring himself closer to the human's eye level. "Little Earthborn who sees beyond the hunt," Vorthok said in the most formal tone of their language, "you have proven your courage in battle, your wisdom in crisis, and your loyalty to this pack. By the oldest laws of our people, by the bond of blood shared in defense of our young, by the honor earned through impossible deeds, I name you kin." The word sent shockwaves through the assembly. Kin was not merely acceptance or friendship. In Karathi culture, it was the highest honor possible for an outsider, a formal adoption that made Heian as much a part of the pack as if he had been born to it. "Rise if you can," Vorthok continued. "Rise and be recognized as family." Heian struggled to his feet, supported by Giwu and Shora. Around him, the assembled Karathi began the ritual howl of acceptance, their voices joining in a harmony that echoed across the mountains. Not every voice joined the chorus. Krex and his followers remained silent, their disapproval clear. They did not challenge the Alpha's decision, and their silence was acceptance enough. As the howling faded, Heian found his voice. "I am honored beyond words," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "But I want to be clear about something. I didn't do any of this to become Karathi. I did it because you had already taught me what it means to be family." Looked around at the assembled pack, meeting eyes both friendly and hostile. "You showed me that strength isn't about size or species. You taught me that courage means protecting others, even when you're afraid. You demonstrated that honor comes from doing what's right, not what's easy. Everything I learned. From watching you, the words seemed to resonate even with some of the traditionalists. Several warriors who had voted against change nodded with grudging respect. "The little Earthborn speaks wisdom," acknowledged Elder Korvac, whose voice carried weight from decades of leadership. "Perhaps the lesson here is not that our ways were wrong, but that they were incomplete. We have learned as much from him as he has from us." In the days that followed, life in the pack began to adapt to its new reality. Hyun established a formal role as cultural liaison between the Karathi and the human colony. New Soul thrived under Karathi protection, while both species shared knowledge and resources. Giwu became the first human researcher granted access to Karathi's sacred sites, her studies leading to breakthroughs in dimensional physics that benefited everyone. The great hunt continued, but with a new understanding. Hunters still proved their courage against dangerous prey, but they also learned to distinguish between creatures that needed to be stopped and those that needed to be helped. The shadow elk, freed from their parasitic torment, became peaceful giants that Karathi youngsters learned to approach with respect rather than weapons. Not every change was easy. Krex never fully accepted the new ways, though he grudgingly acknowledged Heian's place in the pack. Some traditions were lost as others evolved. Growing pains accompanied every adaptation, but the pack endured and grew stronger. The final scene took place 6 months later. During the evening meal around the central fire, Hyun sat among a mixed group of Karathi and human children, teaching the youngsters about problem-solving and engineering while they taught him its advanced tracking techniques. Subin and Teho, the cubs he had saved from the cliff bear, were now approaching adult size but still treated him with the devotion of rescued children. They had become bridges between species, as comfortable with human technology as with traditional Karathi skills. "Tell us again about the shadow elk," Teho requested, his young voice full of wonder. "Tell us how you made it peaceful." As Heian began the story they had all heard dozens of times, he noticed Shora watching from across the fire. The maternal Karathi nodded approval, her expression warm with the satisfaction of seeing her adopted family member truly at home. The laughter that rose around the fire was no longer mocking. It was the sound of shared joy, mutual respect, and genuine affection. The little Earthborn, who had once been ridiculed as weak, had found his strength in showing others a new way too. Be strong, and in the end, that was worth more than all the trilithium in the galaxy. The pack had spoken his true name, Kin, and he was finally completely home.